Okay, in this lesson we are going to focus on anatomical position and specific anatomy terminology and physiology terminology that we are going to be using throughout the rest of this year, and you guys are going to need to continue on it with next year in anatomy and physiology too. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is really why anatomical terminology really exists. If you think about it, there are so many professionals in the medical field that need to be able to communicate with one another. You have radiologists, you have x-ray technicians, you've got physical therapists, you've got doctors, all right? You've got nurses, we're talking RNs, we're talking LPNs, right? You have occupational therapists. You get the idea. There are tons of individuals that need to be on the same page when they're referring to specific diagnoses, when they're talking about patients' conditions. So it's really kind of important for all those medical professionals to be able to communicate effectively with proper terminology. Which brings us to the idea of anatomical position. Anatomical position, which you'll see this lovely gentleman here is displaying for you. Anatomical position is really a specific position that exists for one real reason. All right, so we're asking why it exists. When we start to describe and refer to specific structures and in reference to where specific structures are, the idea of above versus below, behind, in front of, which again there are terms for, but when you refer to something like that, you need to know, okay, well, you know, is hand with palm forward or with palm backward considered anatomical position? Is your palm of your hand front and the heel, the back side of your hand, back? Or is really back side of your hand front and palm back? So it's kind of important to have proper structures and proper position in place so you can properly refer to where things are in reference to body structures. So that's exactly what we're talking about, relative position. All right. So we're talking about where something is relative to anatomical position. So you're assuming that everybody is using anatomical position as their base measurement, their base location, and then they're just referring to in reference to that specific position. So we've got superior and inferior, right? Anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, etc., which we're going to talk about each one individually. This is a nice little diagram that kind of shows a couple of those, anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, etc., to kind of give you an idea about in relation to the human body. So when we talk about superior, when you think that you're superior, you think that you're above everyone. You're better than them, right? So we're talking above or towards the head. We're talking about up, all right? So you need to be using these terms, superior, in reference to something. So one body part is superior to another body part, right? You're using reference points. Remember, relative position. So you're talking about the position of one thing relative to another one. So the forehead's position is superior compared to the nose. It's above it. Inferior is the opposite, right? Inferior would be below. If you feel that you're inferior to someone, you think that you're lower than them, you're not as good as them, right? So again, we're using relative terms. Inferior would be below, right? So the breastbone versus the navel. The navel is inferior to the breastbone. Navel is below the breastbone. So we're always using reference points when we're using these terms. Anterior and posterior, this is where those dorsal and ventral terms come in. Anterior and posterior versus ventral and dorsal can actually be used interchangeably for the most part, or at least very often in humans. And again, we're focusing on human anatomy and physiology. So anterior, we're talking about front. Posterior, we're talking about back. All right. So again, my examples are using relative position. They're talking about one body part's relative position in comparison to another. Medial versus lateral, right? I don't know why, but middle always helps me. So medial is really going to be talking about towards the middle, all right? Towards the center of your body, or I'm sorry, midline, not center, but midline of your body, while lateral is going to be away from your body. So eyes are lateral when you compare them to the bridge of your nose, but your sternum, all right, your breastbone, is medial to your humerus, all right? So you can kind of talk about middle versus away from the middle. Then you have ipsilateral and contralateral. Ipsilateral, if we're looking at midline, sorry that my human body is so bad. Wow, this is really bad. All right, if we're looking at a midline, ipsilateral, we're talking about same side, versus contralateral, again, sorry, bad drawing skills. My drawing kind of looks like it belongs on Yo Gabba Gabba. Contralateral would be referring to opposites, right? So contralateral talking about opposites, while ipsilateral we're talking about same side. So same side and opposite side. Contralateral versus ipsilateral. Proximal versus distal. All right. Proximal means close, while distal means distant, right? Far. So your knee is distal to your thigh, or your knee is distal to your hip, right? It's further away, all right? While at the same time, your elbow is proximal to the wrist. Your elbow is closer to your body than, or to your trunk, I guess, than your wrist. It helps to always think about distance from the trunk of your body, all right? So wrist is distal when you compare it to the elbow. That's because the wrist is further away from the trunk of your body than your elbow is from the trunk of your body. Toes are distal to your calf, and that's because your toes are further away from the trunk of your body than your calf is from the trunk of your body. Even though both are, relatively far away in your appendicular portion of your body, but one is further than the other. Superficial and deep. Sometimes you can probably hear people refer to as being superficial, shallow, right, towards the surface. So talking about location from the inside out, how internal versus external something is. So skin is very superficial, whereas your heart would be more deep, right? So we can refer to in relation to like depth of your body.